This video is about information processing theory, another learning theory of educational psychology. The first learning theory we discussed was behaviorism. While behaviorism has some strengths, it also has weaknesses. Therefore, some educational psychologists developed a new theory that they thought would better describe and help us understand learning. This theory is called information processing theory. As you can see in the graphic, this learning theory is a cognitive learning theory. Cognitive learning theories, or cognitive psychology, have some common assumptions. First, a person's cognition, or their thinking, influences his or her learning. This is different from behaviorism, where people simply responded to a stimulus or not. Also, in cognitive psychology, people can be selective about what they learn. Not everything we are exposed to is something we learn. We have a choice in the matter. Cognitive psychology also states that meaning is constructed by the learner. In other words, learning is not simply material in and material out. The learner has an influence on what they know. What people already know and believe will also influence how and what they learn. And lastly, learners must be active in order to learn, either physically or cognitively. Here you see the definition for information processing theory. We will discuss each part of the definition as we move through this PowerPoint. Here are some basic assumptions that you need to make in order to understand information processing theory. First, information is processed in steps. Also, there are certain characteristics or limitations for each step. And the steps or stages are not mutually exclusive. They interact with each other. Information processing theorists use a metaphor of a computer to help explain this theory. So like the picture you see here, a teacher is the laptop that holds the information. A student is the flash drive that takes in the information. Much like a flash drive, the student is able to choose which information is copied or learned from the laptop or teacher. This is like the assumption that people can select what they learn. The student, like a flash drive, can also rearrange the files and information that's transferred. This is like the assumption that learners construct their own meaning. Now let's discuss the model developed with information processing theory, or the stages in which information is processed. First, information enters the system through the sensory memory, which is also called the sensory register. Then information moves to the working memory, which is also called short-term memory. The last stage in the system is long-term memory. As you can see in the model, the system is interactive, meaning information does not flow in only one direction. Information can travel back and forth between the different stages. Let's talk about each of the stages or memory stores in detail. First, the sensory register, also known as the sensory memory, has a large storage capacity. It can hold a lot of stuff. It has to deal with all of the sensory information you encounter on a moment-to-moment basis. However, that information cannot be stored in the sensory registry for very long, 1.5 to 4 seconds. If the information is not processed and moved to the next stage of the system, that information is gone forever, or at least it must be repeated. The next stage, the short-term memory, has both a short duration and a small capacity. Therefore, information must be processed here quickly so it can be used. If information is not processed quickly, it will be lost from the system, which is your memory. Also, if more information is being pushed into the short-term memory than it can handle, some of that information will be lost. The short-term memory can only handle 5 to 9 pieces of information at one time. We call this 7 plus or minus 2. This is why phone numbers are given 7 digits. This stage is also called working memory because this is where information is constructed or worked on. Finally, if information is processed through the sensory register and the short-term memory, it comes to long-term memory. Here we can store unlimited amounts of information for a very long time, possibly forever. According to information processing theory, if information makes it all the way into long-term memory, we can say it has been learned. Here you can see the model for memory again, but with the addition of executive functions. The executive functions are the processes that enable information to be processed in the system. For information to move from the sensory register to the short-term memory, a person must 1. Pay attention to that information, and 2. Recognize what that information is. We have a few options to move information from short-term memory into long-term memory. First, we can rehearse the information or repeat it over and over. However, this is not an effective way to learn information. So another way is through organization. Information must be organized in a way that makes sense to the learner in order to learn it. Also, learners can use elaboration and visual imagery to learn information. These strategies involve expanding on a piece of information or elaborating, or creating a mental image or visual imagery to help the learner remember it. Once information gets into the long-term memory, we can say it has been learned. However, for that information to be useful, we need to access it or retrieve it. The retrieval process is pulling information from long-term memory into working memory in order to use it. This process can be automatic, so you don't have to think about it, like how to brush your teeth, or it can be conscious, like how to solve a long division problem. You have to think about it. Retrieval is done either by recognition or recall. Sometimes we just need to see something and say, yes, we know what it is, like a multiple choice test. That's recognition. Other times we have to recreate the information, like an essay test. That is recall. Earlier I said if information is stored in long-term memory, it will be there forever. So why do people forget? The definition of forgetting, according to information processing theory, is actually retrieval failure. In other words, the information is there, but the person cannot access it. There are 3 theories as to why people forget. First, decay theory. This is the idea that if you don't use it, you lose it. The information gets shoved to the back and then you can't find it. The second theory is interference. This is the idea that when you learn new information, this new information gets in the way of old information so that you can't have access to the old information anymore. The last theory is cue-dependent theory. This theory says that people forget because the retrieval process depends on a certain cue in order to access that information. When the cue is not present, a person is unable to retrieve the information. What does all this mean for you as future teachers? Well, remember, the goal of teaching and learning, according to information processing theory, is to help students process and encode or store information for future use.